Welcome to Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.
I'm your host,
Are we doing a
Madeline.
video thing for this? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, but now I already started the recording, so now this is in the video.
I mean, like, you know what? I just got out of the shower. I got home from a very rainy day in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
And, I combed my hair.
Oh, yeah, it looks kind of nice. I can kind of tell. You kind of look like an old-timey ghost right now, actually.
Don't love that.
You're kind of backlit and everything's
my,
gray and hazy.
apparently my dad watched one of our Patreon episodes.
Oh,
Don't love
great.
that.
Yeah, that's not great.
And his one comment was, David, you have to comb your hair.
Oh my God, that was his one comment? All right, Dad.
Yeah. You
Could
know,
be worse.
the real dad moment for him.
Could be worse. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, it's raining in LA, which means the whole city is shut down. We are not equipped to deal with the rain. We don't know how to deal with this. I believe it was like an inch every hour was falling in LA or something insane like that.
I mean, that's crazy. It's crazy out there.
It's wild out there. Things are flooding. People are panicking. I cut the tip of my finger off today making a soup.
That has nothing to do with the rain.
You don't know that, though. It could, like a butterfly effect situation.
Uh-huh.
It could. What's the one variable? I've never cut the tip of my finger off before.
Oh, wait. When you told me that, I was thinking about, this is our banter. I always ask you before we record if we're doing banter.
And it's definitely not very neurodivergent of you to announce this is the banter part of the episode. That's very normal.
We're doing banter. People don't like it, I've learned, but
they like a little banter. They like a little banter. The people
a little banter is fine. Okay, so many years ago, right when I moved to Southern California, I made a friend who. Okay, so do you remember when I went to the San Francisco? This is going to be the most like otiose and like labyrinthine stupid story in the fucking world, but there's a payoff.
Okay.
And it has to do with like slicing off a bit of your finger.
Okay.
Do you remember when many years ago I spent like a month at the San Francisco Zen Center on Laguna?
I do. It was very close to my house.
I was in an old Jewish boarding school, so there were a lot of like Stars of David everywhere, and people smoked on the roof. It was great.
Stars of You.
Yes. But so for that month, I did not hear music or cut my hair.
Oh, okay.
And so when I got home, I got in my car and I turned on college radio in Fresno, California, and I drove to a barber. And I heard Clap Your Hands Say Yeah.
Oh, perfect for the time. That's what you want to hear in that era in San Francisco or Fresno.
And which is like, this is not my style of music. I don't like it.
I mean, it was like Talking Heads. It was like hipster indie sleaze Talking Heads.
Yeah, everyone wore big hats.
I don't think Clap Your Hands Say Yeah wore big hats.
I feel like that they had like the deepest of V-neck t-shirts.
They might have worn a V-neck t-shirt.
I feel like that, but right, it's not my style of music. It's I didn't like Brooklyn as like a vibe.
As a concept, right. Yeah.
At the time, the Vice offices or whatever.
Right.
But I hadn't heard music in like a month. And so I was like on my way to the barber shop, listening to college radio, and the song came on, and I was like, this is the best thing that's ever, like, this is the best combination of sounds that's ever fucking happened.
You know what? I think that I really like Clap Your Hands Say Yeah, personally.
Well, okay, so skip forward to when Madeline's out of the fucking frame.
I'm sorry. Bork was being weird. When that happens, you should keep talking so the audio.
Oh, okay. Well, but this is like a video fucking thing.
Well, okay, it's only video for Patreon. It's just going to be audio for the regular.
So 15 years later, 20 years later, however many fucking years later, right? I am telling a friend of mine that I met in Claremont this story. And this is a story about how deprived of sound I was, right? Not a story about how much I love the 2000 like Obama era indie rock band Clap Your Hands Say Yeah. Right. And
Yes.
and it's like a funny story, but she took it as like David's favorite band is Clap Your Hands Say Yeah, and they happened to be
Oh my God.
touring, and they were playing at the Echoplex, and for some fakakta fucking reason, tickets to this Echoplex ass show, $45,
Yeah, that's wild. That's
which
way
is
too much.
crazy for like a band that had like one song that was kind of popular for like
Mhm.
a month in 2007 or whatever.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of money.
But so she bought tickets to this fucking show, and she surprised me, and she was like, "This is your birthday present. Oh my God." And I was like, I want so badly to get out of this because there is nothing I would hate more than spending presumably like an hour and a half
Minimum.
watching a bunch of, so in any case, I was making dinner before the show.
Did you
and
intentionally cut part of your finger off?
I did not intentionally cut part of my finger off.
But the gods were kind to you that day.
Well, yeah, but then I was like, she spent so much money that I didn't have Band-Aids. So I cut part of my finger off on like the can top of a like can of tomatoes. So badly that like it would not stop bleeding. And so I wrapped it in paper towel and some Band-Aids, and it was just dripping blood down my arm, and I went to the show with her at the Echoplex, and
Covered
then
in
like,
blood.
just like covered in blood. Like the bartender had to get out her like towel to mop up the blood.
Oh, you're a biohazard. Yeah,
I was a
yeah.
biohazard.
Yeah, at the Clap Your Hands Say Yeah show.
I was the punkiest thing at the fucking show. Just to
Well,
say, sometimes you cut off a bit of your finger and you soldier the fuck on.
you just soldier on, and that's what we're doing tonight. I was like, oh, should we record? Oh, but we skipped last week, and I was just like, fuck it, we're charging. I will say though, if you've never cut off a chunk of your finger before, it does bleed. David, if anything, undersold how much it bleeds. My whole
That's
house
crazy.
covered in blood. You're like, how much blood is coming out of my finger? I had to lay down on the ground because I was like, I have lost so much blood out of my finger. I think I might pass out. And I am not a squeamish person.
I mean,
but
I
it
gotta
was
say
pure
that's
blood
a little
loss.
psychosomatic. Like, because like I will say too. Here's my live review of that show. A lot of oversized knit beanies.
Oh, that was also the era. Yes, this makes sense. Like a slouchy beanie.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a slouchy Neff beanie. Yeah. And the blood loss.
All over the floor of the Echoplex.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I took I'm not gonna lie to you, David. I took a chunk out of my own finger tonight.
I was telling you because you were making soup.
I was making soup, yeah.
And I started to joke about it, and then I realized you were like maybe not in a joke mood.
No, my whole life's falling apart. I'm cutting off chunks of my fingers. My soup didn't come out great.
I don't know. Like, I don't know if blood as a soup ingredient.
Oh my God, no, it did not get in the soup. I was peeling a potato when it happened. I don't want to get into details, but I sliced away. I sliced away from me and took out like a pebble of my own
do you
flesh.
peel with a peeler, or are you you're with a knife?
I did it with a peeler, but I might switch to a knife after this. Let me tell you, it's horrible. I don't recommend
you gotta get the mandolin.
Yeah, but then oh God, okay, now I'm just thinking of different ways you can cut your own hand. This is bad for the OCD. All right, let's get into the episode. Enough banter.
All right, what are we talking about?
The banter's painful. All right, so we today are doing part 2 of our 2-part episode series on Ukraine and the U.S. kind of history of destabilization and intervention in the region. And do you remember where we left off in our last episode, David?
I think we were right about to do Euromaidan.
We were. So we had got up to 2013. And as a brief recap for anybody for whom it's been a few weeks, what basically is going on is that the United States has their hands all over meddling in Ukraine going back to World War II. And Ukraine has this history of a problem with far-right fascist nationalist extremism there. In fact, it was this one group under this guy named Stepan Bandera called the OUN that was responsible for assisting Hitler in carrying out the Holocaust in Ukraine, which is part of the reason that historians think Ukraine had the highest rate of casualty out of any country during the Holocaust. It's estimated that 25% of all Holocaust victims came from Ukraine, which is really, really tragic. And it has a lot to do with this guy, Stepan Bandera, participating and helping him. And he's going to be relevant in today's episode, a whole 60 some odd years later, because the legacy of Bandera ends up being something that the United States invests a lot into to try to build as a new right-wing political force in Ukraine. And they've already started this. We've done in the past few years. We've seen that the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the CIA's NGO, has been pumping some money into this effort. So we're opening up with 2013. And this year, Ukraine receives more funding from the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA's NGO, right, than any other European country, coming in at $2.8 million. Now, David, I feel like whenever we talk about the finances, you're always shocked at how cheap propaganda is.
Well, okay, so here's one thing that I've been thinking about a lot is that Ukraine, there are two kinds of conceptions of Europe that are competing at the moment, which usually go by like the names Greater Europe and Wider Europe. So at the time, right, we talked about Timoshenko, right, the gas princess.
Yes. She was the Heidi Braid, for anyone who remembers, and my takeaway about Timoshenko,
she was
really
like massively corrupt or whatever. And was like, but like she was like massively corrupt in the way that everyone, or like the elites in Ukraine are generally fucking corrupt.
She does seem kind of like a middle ground between the Western and the Eastern interests.
I mean, I feel like a lot of the sort of like oligarchic power structure, like they like to play both sides. But right, so like the Greater or Wider Ukraine thing was, there was like a de Gaulle style notion of what Europe could be. That was the quote unquote Greater Europe thing, which I think Putin was really pushing at the time, which was the idea that like the EU would expand to become a kind of like in a way that would include Russia. And the EU was pushing for what sometimes gets called the Wider Europe notion, which is basically an economic expansion into Ukraine.
Right. That's interesting to consider. Well, we've got a cast of characters from last time that we're going to have to remember. So the first guy is Yanukovych. And David, do you remember which one Yanukovych was?
Yanukovych is I remember from, I actually have the Richard Sakwa book sitting right next to me. So I remember more from that than from last.
Okay.
Or whatever. He's the Russian-oriented motherfucker who sort of takes over and kind of centralizes the sort of oligarchic power structure.
Well, kind of. So he was the alternative to the Western-backed far-right extremist Yushchenko, whose wife, if we remember correctly, was affiliated with right-wing extremist groups here in the United States. So the basically main players in the recent elections we've been talking about in the last episode were Yanukovych versus Yushchenko. And Yushchenko was far-right extremist, Western-backed dude. Yanukovych was more of a business-as-usual Ukrainian leader. You know, he had positive feelings about Russia. Russia was their next-door neighbor. He wanted to maintain diplomatic relations. He wasn't totally opposed to the idea of working with Europe or the EU or NATO, but he kind of recognized the ability to, or the necessity, really, to kind of straddle the line with both of these forces. Now, so 2013 kicks off, and Yanukovych, in this same pursuit of trying to keep all the kids happy and keep them from fighting with each other, right, pardons Timoshenko's former interior minister, Yuri Lutsenko, who had been in prison over, like, corruption dealing that Timoshenko had been in prison for, too. And this is seen by the public, basically, in Ukraine as an attempt by Yanukovych to reconcile these disparate elements of Ukraine's government, from the pro-EU side, the pro-Russia side, the pro-Russia side in the East, the pro-EU side in the West, right? He's like, look, I'm technically a Russia guy, but I'm going to throw Timoshenko's team a bone here and release them from prison. And Yanukovych even contemplates a new political deal that would strengthen the relationship that Ukraine actually has with the EU. So you can tell he's trying to do some sort of compromise situation here. Now, September 26, 2013, Carl German, who's the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, right? Again, what is that, David? Shorthand?
That's the CIA's NGO.
CIA's NGO, right? Writes an op-ed in the Post and basically says Ukraine is, quote, the biggest prize, right, politically going on at that time, and an important step towards toppling Putin, who, quote, may find himself on the losing end, not just in the near abroad, but within Russia itself. So this is really weird. The National Endowment for Democracy's whole thing has always been what the CIA used to do covertly, we just do overtly, and they're really taking it there, right? We've got the president of the National Endowment for Democracy being like, we're coming for Ukraine because we want to fuck with Putin. And he's just putting it in a newspaper like it's no big deal. And you're like, oh my God, you guys used to be more quiet about that kind of stuff. Okay. So in November 2013, this new deal that basically Yanukovych had been working on gets scrapped because he's like, okay, this Russia situation is getting a little out of control. This is going to make our relationship with Russia way worse. It's going to be bad for the Ukrainian people. And he's not wrong, right? This was correct. I think this was the correct move on his part, because this deal he was working on with the EU wasn't just a trade deal. Like Section 2.3 of the EU-Ukraine Association Agenda, that's all based around this deal, would have required people who signed it to, quote, take measures to foster military cooperation and cooperation of technical character between the EU and Ukraine, and encourage and facilitate direct cooperation on concrete activities jointly identified by both sides between relevant Ukrainian institutions and CFSP, CSDF agencies, and bodies such as the European Defense Agency, the European Union Institute for Security Studies, the European Union Satellite Center, and the European Security and Defense College. So
Okay, but so
it's a military alliance.
no, okay, yeah. I mean, but this is like the kind of like thing that's fucked about like those association agreements, which like a bunch of association agreements were sort of like put forward between the early 2000s and 2013, which is that they sort of push, like they don't provide the benefits of like EU membership, right? Like membership in the fucking common market or whatever. But they do put a lot of demands on Ukraine.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
Like,
totally
that's like,
true. Yes. So they're like, if you want to do this trade deal, you also have to enter a military alliance with us, but it's not going to be like NATO. You're not like joining NATO. You just got to let us do whatever we want there, basically, and help us out. And the EU association agenda also would have required Ukraine, additionally, to stop certain areas of trade they had going on with Russia. So,
well, the other thing, like because I read the fucking Sakwa book about this. The other thing about those, like Putin at the time was like, hell yeah, man, let's do Greater Europe. Like, let's all be in. Or like he kept trying to foster meetings with EU representatives to come to some sort of agreement that would include Ukraine, but not like essentially move Ukraine from one side of the board to the other.
right. And I think this is something that's pretty obvious, is that Putin, for him, it really does seem like it's a Russia national security issue. He doesn't want Ukraine being made a formal enemy of Russia right there in Russia's backyard. Like, that is a national security risk.
And I want to press back on that a bit because, like, Ukraine is Russia's largest buyer of natural gas, for example. Like, there are economic interests at stake here, and it's not so much that like Ukraine has natural resources that Russia wants, though coke and steel plants are important, but that, right, like Ukraine drifting away from Russian influence means like a drift in the balance of economic power.
Yeah, I mean, they are also, doing, like I said, they're doing trade deals. And we saw in the last episode, we talked about some of the natural gas deals that were going on between the EU and Ukraine versus Russia and Ukraine. But I really don't think that doesn't seem to me like Russia's primary motivating factor. That Russia's been concerned about NATO going back to the 90s, right?
No, I mean, I think, right, like, it is, like, the two, at least, like, I'm taking this from the Sacco book or whatever, it's, like, two different conceptions of what Europe can be in the post-war era, one of which is, like, the greater Europe thing that is a kind of, like, cooperative deal, and the other of which is the wider Europe deal, which is, like an eastward expansion of Western power.
Right.
Right.
No, I think it's pretty obvious Putin has been trying to play ball, trying to do negotiations, and the West has just been shutting him down every step of this way. I think that is definitely something we see. So experts also note here that another key component to trade, because Ukraine has that rich reserve of uranium, other natural minerals, Ukraine's agricultural sector is the third largest exporter of corn worldwide, the fifth largest exporter of wheat. It's called the breadbasket of Europe. This whole trade element is something that the EU wants their hands on as well, right? That is something that the United States wants its hands on as well. Like, this is an issue that everybody is taking note of. One report said, quote, in the last decade, the agricultural sector has been characterized by a growing concentration of production within very large agricultural holdings. Why is that the hardest word to say? That use large-scale intensive farming systems. Not surprisingly, the presence of foreign corporations in the agricultural sector and the size of agro holdings are both growing quickly, with more than 1.6 million hectares signed over to foreign companies for agricultural purposes in recent years. So this quote continues, now the goal is to set policies that will benefit Western corporations. Whereas Ukraine does not allow the use of genetically modified organisms, GMOs, in agriculture, Article 404 of the EU agreement, which relates to agriculture, includes a clause that has generally gone unnoticed. Both parties will cooperate to extend the use of biotechnologies. Given the struggle for resources in Ukraine and the influx of foreign investors in the agricultural sector, an important question in whether the results of the program will benefit Ukraine and its farmers by securing their property rights or pave the way for corporations to more easily access property and land. By encouraging reforms such as the deregulation of seed and fertilizer markets, the country's agricultural sector is being forced open to foreign corporations such as DuPont and Monsanto. So a big chunk of what people want access to is this agricultural sector, basically, as well. The trade element is definitely important. Now, Russian officials delivered draft treaties to the United States and NATO, saying that further alliance expansions should stop and the West should move its military forces away from Russian borders. They were like, hey, this is sketching us out. Can you get your military, away from us? And U.S. and EU officials just refused. They were like, Ukraine is gonna join NATO, whether you like it or not, and Russia doesn't get veto power over that decision. Sorry. Which is a big deal, because remember, again, in the past, the U.S. had promised Russia that NATO would never expand 1 inch east of Germany. So this is a big shift. This is a breaking of a promise. Mm-hmm. And Yanukovych, in an effort to kind of keep the peace in Ukraine, is like, oh God, this is getting out of control. He's like, you know what? It is not worth provoking Russia by signing these deals with the EU, basically. It's like, it's a losing battle. So this is what really launches the start of what people call Euromaidan. Okay? So protests break out, right? And the pro-EU elements of Ukraine are really driving it. And the pro-EU elements are backed largely by far right-wing extremists, which we'll talk about in a second. Lutsenko and Klitschko end up emerging as the leaders of these large demonstrations that would be basically the biggest ones that happened since the Orange Revolution in 2004 under George W. Bush. And they all kind of congregate around Kiev's Maidan Square. And the police have to violently disperse them because these protests are so out of control. So a lot of the demonstrators are Banderites, Bandera followers. That's how far right they are. That guy who was basically a Nazi collaborator who had been responsible for aiding in the murder of countless Ukrainians during Holocaust. Well, the far-right neo-Nazi extremists, inspired by, the groups that have been operating out of the United States, right, they never went away. There were always these people who still looked up to Bandera. And during the Maidan Revolution, they really took a large role, especially in the more violent elements of the clashes that happened. They don't call themselves Banderites. That's like an American English term. They call themselves Banderitsi or Binderis or whatever, something like that. So this is getting out of control. And a key player that's emerging, even though they're small in numbers, they're big in power, is these basically neo-Nazi groups, the Banderas, the Banderites. So Russia, meanwhile, is like, look, we're going to offer you guys a deal, Ukraine. We're going to cut the price of natural gas, and we're going to purchase $15 billion in Ukrainian bonds to help you guys out economically, because we recognize you're taking an economic hit by vetoing this trade deal with the EU. So not only does Ukraine not sign this deal with the EU, they signed a new deal, right, with Russia. And by November of 2013, a new alliance had formed out of these right-wing neo-Nazi kind of groups that were revolving around this Maidan issue. And they're extremists, right? The Banderites are part of it. There's other kind of far-right fascist groups emerging during this as well. And all of them align themselves.
Okay, so Ned's involved, right?
Yes.
Which means, like, the comical thing about this in terms of sort of like if you are an American audience, the comical positioning is that you also get, like, student groups who are, like, liberal involved in the Maidan shit, where it's like, right, it's like your Berkeley style motherfuckers.
Oh, those people do not last long. There's actually an interview with one anarchist from Ukraine who's like, oh yeah, I tried to go to those protests. I lasted around 10 minutes before a neo-Nazi was literally like, this is not for you and we will literally fucking kill you.
Yeah, but it was just like, right, they do, like, student groups are there. They might not last long, but, like, there are, like, Ned type liberal groups as well as neo-Nazis.
Okay. Well, most of the focus going on, there's a lot of different types of groups, but they're not really the ones who have, like, political power in this situation, we'll say. So all of the ultra-nationalist far-right neo-Nazis and extremists, which, again, these aren't most of the protesters, but they're the ones with the most power behind them. They are the most violent. They're the most extreme. They are calling the shots. They get organized under a new umbrella heading called the Right Sector, right? And the reason why they are looking to the West, to the United States, to the EU, is because they're anti-Russian, right? And they have this dream of, like, a Ukrainian ethno-state, basically. And they fancy themselves, like Hitler did, white people, Aryan people, and that feels more European, right? So that's kind of where their heads are at. Now, Salon actually wrote about Right Sector and described them as, this way. They said, Right Sector is a shadowy syndicate of self-described autonomous nationalists identified by their skinhead style of dress, ascetic lifestyle, and fascination with street violence. Armed with riot shields and clubs, the group's cadres have manned the front lines of the Euromaidan battles this month, filling the air with their signature chant, Ukraine above all. In a recent Right Sector propaganda video, the group promised to fight against degeneration and totalitarian liberalism for traditional national morality and family values. So I think this sounds pretty outwardly fascist in terms of rhetoric, right? And the article says, with Svoboda, who's one of these groups, linked to a constellation of international neo-fascist parties throughout the alliance of European national movements, Right Sector is promising to lead its army of aimless, disillusioned young men on, quote, a great European reconquest. So I think this is a pretty good kind of summary of what we're looking at here. Svoboda is one of these far-right groups, right? Right Sector is this kind of umbrella organization. And the Right Sector's ideology is, based on ultra-nationalist values, the same ultra-nationalist values that were popular under the OUN, Bandera's organization. That was the party that was obviously founded in Western Ukraine to directly and operated, not to directly support, but operated in direct support of Nazi Germany between 1939 and 1941. So the International Crisis Group states the Right Sector, quote, rejects democracy, has no interest in the EU, and routinely describes the mainstream Maidan protesters as part of the system or part of the problem. So this gives you some insight to them, too. They don't actually have an interest in joining the EU, but they're aligning themselves with these people. They're looking at and they're like, this feels more right than the pro-Russian contingency. And they have this history as OUN Bandera supporters of viewing Russia as some sort of oppressor, which we could see from the last episode is not historically accurate in Ukraine. It's not what most people in Ukraine are thinking, and that's not really what's going on there. So the right sector's goals, one of them, just got to throw it out there, includes combating homosexuality. So they also homophobic, hate gay people. Now, according to the U.S. State Department's country reports on human rights practices for 2015, right sector members were among a group of people who on June 6th of 2015 attacked an LGBT pride march in Kiev. And that same source says that during the incidents, the attackers physically assaulted protesters and police and threw firecrackers laced with shrapnel that ended up injuring 9 people at the Pride March and 10 police officers. An article in the New York Times said that Right Sector issued a joint statement with the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN, the Bandera group, right, that still exists to this day, even though Bandera is long gone, prior to the planned gay pride parade in Kiev, saying, in short, it will be a bloody mess. So they're doing domestic terrorism against gay people, right? So Right Sector, yeah, they're doing domestic terrorism, and the Maidan protests happen, and they're like, this is an opportunity, we're going to get involved. And they get involved in a major way. So these are neo-Nazis, right, who are supporting Western-based forces for a number of reasons in the region. They're nationalists. They don't really want the United States super involved, but they see this as a means to an end. So number one of the reasons, nationalists hate communists, Nazis hate communists. And although Russia is not communist anymore, we see that they are still heavily associating Russia with communism. You can see video footage of Right Sector, for example, neo-Nazis roaming the streets of Ukraine around this time, yelling basically that they're going to find and kill communists, like specifically. Like this is anti-communist behavior, and they are associating Russia with communists. The second is that communism is always the enemy of nationalism and neo-Nazi ideology. Historically, this makes sense, right?
Wait, hold on, Madeline.
What?
Question.
Yeah.
How do you feel about nationalism?
I told you, I feel the same way. I think it can be an effective tool for oppressed, colonized people to identify themselves on a path to liberation, but it cannot, you need to shift it to a different ideology. It cannot be an end solution.
Okay.
Okay, I know you don't feel that way.
Yeah.
So the second reason is that they think aligning themselves with the EU will just provide the right strategic setting for this ethno-state of white people to emerge in Ukraine. They don't actually care about the EU, but they're like, this just is like the right vibe for whiteness.
What's the line? Like when the European steel and coal sector was like the precursor to the EU was founded, the line was to keep the US in Germany down and France up, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that was like the policy of the EU. I think we think of the EU as like a relatively neutral, like Euro communist or Euro socialist kind of bourgeois socialist entity, but it is like a specific entity that came out of like Cold War politics.
Yeah, no, to me, it's still like an imperialist arm, right, of military alliance. Mm-hmm. So far-right activists that were interviewed by the BBC's Gabriel Gatehouse in Kiev at this time still made it clear, though. They're like, we're aligning ourselves with the EU stuff, but let's be clear, our goal is to build a Ukraine, quote, just for Ukrainians. So they want to build a massive state. So as if this isn't enough, this month, also on November 21st, 2013, just one day after these protests kind of began, a new TV station called Hromadske TV was launched, followed by a couple new ones after that as well, Spilno TV and Espresso TV. All 3 of these news stations were funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, and they began broadcasting anti-Yanukovych content and trying to rally people into the streets to join the Euromaidan protests. So in December, then Senator John McCain goes to Ukraine alongside Victoria Nuland, right? Who is what is Nuland's job at this time? She's the Secretary of State or Defense?
No, she is not okay, we're fully in Obama term.
Oh, that's Hillary Clinton.
That's Hillary Clinton.
What was her
by the way,
official
Hillary
title?
Clinton. Okay, here's the fucking thing. Hillary Clinton rebuffed Putin on a Transnistria deal
Right.
at the time.
Joe, Transnistria. That's an interesting deep cut.
You,
You know,
okay,
they
I'm
don't
not
call
saying
it that.
No, but okay,
That's what
here's the
we
thing.
call it. That's not what they call it.
What's that?
They don't call it Transnistria.
What the fuck do they call it?
Let me see what locals call Transnistria. Locals call it Pridnestrovian.
Okay,
Pridnestrovian.
whatever the fuck. Right?
Pridnestrovian.
Like, so by the way, it is worth doing some background here. We are in full Hillary Clinton era Secretary of State, where we are overthrowing every fucking government we goddamn can.
Okay, so I wasn't that far off, for the record. Victoria Nuland's official title was Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. I knew she was some sort of Secretary of State.
Yeah, but she got, I mean, European, Eurasian Affairs, she got an asterisk next to her fucking name. All I'm saying, if you're goddamn Putin, just imagine you're Putin. You're bald, Madeline.
All right, I can run with it, yeah.
You're 5'7", which...
I'm tall.
You're tall.
Huge, massive, very tall of me.
You're one of the richest men in the world, but you only make $130,000 a year.
Well, I'm really good at investing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You're really good at bullying fucking oligarchs in Russia.
Maybe a little bit too. Would it be so bad?
Maybe,
Would it be so bad?
A guy every now and again.
I don't know. Maybe they had it coming. I don't know.
My point being, you are like, there is like an ideology forming that we can call democratism, which is like, hey, bro, we don't pursue democracy as like an idea, like democracy, like you're on some like the West is on some Fukuyama shit, where we're just like pushing democracy everywhere we go, and we're doing regime change to fucking get it.
Right. It's not. Right. It's not democracy. And democracy at this point is just a synonym when the West uses it for capitalism.
Gaddafi just fucking fell.
Right. That's
right. If you are Putin, there is a moment where you're looking at the Ukraine shit, and you're going, bro, this feels like you're coming for me, man.
Right. And Putin wasn't wrong. The United States explicitly said, remember, the president of the National Endowment for Democracy posted in a major newspaper, "We are coming for you, Putin." Like, this is very out in the open. This is not a gas. This is not speculative. The United States is like, oh yeah, we're coming for you. We're taking Ukraine.
Yeah, which is like, again, like I know you get accused of being like a shill for a lot of people.
Yeah, everything. Everybody's apparently paying me. Why don't I have any money? If everybody's allegedly paying me to say this stuff, where's all my cash?
So there's this, I can't remember the name. There's like some fucking name to the conference, but there's some fucking conference or like some meeting that Putin had after he was elected president, where it was like all the like fucking kleptocrats who had been running Russia under Yeltsin, where he was basically like, hey guys, so it's real cool what you're doing, but if you don't fuck with me, then you're going to die.
Well, you know, maybe that's what you got to do.
Love that you're using your phone as a mirror. And
well, I just smeared eyeliner all over my face. If you're watching the video, you can see it because I got a fleck of mascara caught under my contact lens, and it was really painful.
You cut off a finger.
I'm really falling apart. Right now.
You're
I'm
literally
falling apart. I look insane. It's a whole fucking thing.
Right, which is my point being, Putin is not like he's no one's Vladimir Lenin.
No.
Right, like he's like not a guy, but he's just like, he is a politician on the international stage doing like real like pragmatism.
Yeah. Yes. And I would say he's the more honorable character between him and the United States right now in this situation.
I mean, it was just like not, you know, he doesn't have to, like, that's not like a high bar.
But he's meeting it. He's meeting it, you know? So in December, then Senator John McCain and Assistant Secretary of State to European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland, go to Kiev. They go to Ukraine to get involved in these protests. Very normal. Nothing to be concerned about. Very, very normal for John McCain to come to your action. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, because he was in that jail cell. Like, he just...
When he was a prisoner of war?
Yes.
That was decades
They
ago.
should have killed him.
That was decades back.
They
So
should have killed him.
they go and they stand next to the leader of one of these right sector groups, Svoboda, whose name is Ole Tyahnybak. And they stand next to this guy. He's like a far-right fascist neo-Nazi extremist. John McCain gets next to him on a stage and starts addressing the crowd. Just like, yep, I'm here. These are my people.
What?
So-
He did stand next to Sarah Palin.
Yeah, I don't think he hated Sarah Palin either.
No, I'm just saying, like, right, like the fact that this is surprising.
I mean, this guy's like, he's like a Nazi. People are like, whoa, John McCain standing next to this Nazi. Like, that's pretty wild. You know, it's pretty egregious, I think, even for the United States. We tend to do things a little more low-key with our Nazi stuff. This was just like out in the open, like, I'm doing Nazi stuff, you know? So yeah, it was pretty weird. So December 5th, 2013, a U.S.-Ukraine Foundation conference happens, and Nuland is there. They're flying all over the place. And she brags. She's like, yeah, what's happening in Ukraine? We did that. She's like, hey, we invested $5 billion there to build, quote, democratic skills and institutions in Ukraine. So like you were talking about, David, it's like it's not actual democracy. It's building capitalism. It's building Western interests. And she didn't offer any details of how. Now, 1 week after this, is kind of when, well, this is 1 week after the actual, like, John McCain goes to my job, blah, 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 this whole thing at this dinner. She goes, we stand with the people of Ukraine in their search for justice, human dignity, security, a return to economic health, and for the European future they have chosen and that they deserve. Now, again, not everybody in Ukraine wants to join Europe. Not all of them think of themselves as Europe. There are huge sections of Ukraine that think of themselves as Russian and not European. So it's wild that she said this. This is absolutely bonkers. This would be like being like, we stand with the people of Southern California and their decision to pursue the Mexican future they have chosen for themselves. You know, at this point, I wouldn't complain. I'd be like, all right, Mexico, if you'll take us.
So Gen Z might have some other...
fake Gen Z protests. But you know what I mean? You're like, oh shit, okay, you're just going with this. All right, okay. So
Claudia Sheinbaum, get at me is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think us being absorbed into Mexico would really be a win for us, way more than Ukraine into Europe. That's all I'm saying. But, you know, that's like a close equivalent, right? So remember, also worth noting, the people of Ukraine didn't choose any of this. Like, not all of them anyway, and definitely not in bulk. The USA and a bunch of weird Nazis we were working with chose this for them. This was a path laid out by the United States through propaganda and through a bunch of weird Nazi groups we were fostering and working with.
It was funny, when I was reading Silkwa's book or whatever, it was, you know, and it was like the language issue, which Yanukovych was like a big deal with. Like it was like 80% of Ukrainians spoke Russian either as their first or second language. And it was like, you know, Silkwa's point was like 20% of Ukrainians want to just like be Russian, right? But like there's not like an anti-Russian bias among most Ukrainians. Right,
exactly. And we talked about this with the 2009 data in the last episode, but most Ukrainians saw the influence of Russia in their country as pretty good. They really regretted the dissolution of the USSR. They had strong positive feelings about Russia, even if they weren't themselves ethnically Russian. So this idea that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they've chosen to be European, that is the United States making that choice for them, with some really weird neo-Nazis out there that we made buddies with. Even the Cato Institute, which is pretty conservative, said the extent of the Obama administration's meddling in Ukraine's politics was breathtaking. So the Obama administration, but remember, this is after George W. Bush. George W. Bush was super involved in that. Before him, the first George Bush was super involved in there. So this is what we mean when we're like, Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter. Whoever's president, they just yes and the policies of the guy behind him. George W. Bush was doing this. Obama was like, yes and I will do more.
Well, no, okay. You had that thing where you told that guy on the airplane that your biggest issue was foreign policy,
Yes.
which I still think is crazy. But
I don't
like I
think it's
get
crazy.
it. I mean, it's just like I'm too dumb for that. But right, like because it is like both parties believe the same fucking thing about foreign policy. Like they come like it's like the difference is aesthetic.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. So this is how we end 2013. There's been protests. The Nazis have emerged. The US has come to stand next to them and go, we like what these Nazis are doing. Yanukovych's like, fuck, I don't really know how to proceed here. And over in Russia, Putin's like, uh-oh, the United States has got their sights set on me. So 2014 is kind of the year where I'm going to say everything happens. Realistically, we're probably only going to get through 2014 today, and then it's going to be a three-parter, and everything after 2014 is going to come after, because 2014 is massive. So much happens in this year. So we'll see how we do, but that's kind of my estimate.
Are we even? You gave me a section on the Azov Brigade, which I expanded to be about the fucking oligarchs in Ukraine.
We're going to get into that in 2014.
Okay.
Because they haven't even been formally created yet. Remember, there's right sector.
Well, no, like Azov Battalion has its roots in Svoboda back in like 1990.
Right. But Azov itself doesn't fully exist yet. So I'm going to give a little turnover to you, and we're going to talk about that at a point in 2014.
Okay.
Now, National Endowment for Democracy spending in Ukraine jumps to around $4.5 million per year. This is massive. This includes specifically $2.1 million earmarked for Ukraine's presidential and early parliamentary elections alone. So we're really spending money there. And remember, propaganda is cheap. This is relatively cheap, especially compared to like military-style armed operations. But it's still a lot of money relative to how much money we usually spend on propaganda. Because again, $50K can get you a lot of propaganda. So, January 2014, the protests at Maidan had basically turned into riots. And right sector gets heavily involved in a clash with police in Kiev on January 19th. And right sector in all of this are like demanding for the removal of President Yanukovych. So Yanukovych passes a bunch of laws to try to squash these riots, but in response, hundreds of thousands of people take to the streets. And bloody clashes ensue, the demonstrations spread. And Parliament repeals the laws, trying to control the protests. Like, never mind, our bad, okay, we heard you. But it doesn't really do the trick.
I mean, this is, right, like, we're watching this play out in real time with Maduro right now.
Yes.
Right, where I don't think the Venezuelan people are quite so stoked on regime change. But it is one of those things where like a quote unquote color revolution can get like whatever like pent up aggression you happen to have. Ned didn't pay for hundreds of thousands of people. There are some people out there.
They didn't, but the population of Ukraine is, the population of California. So this would be like Fresno's going buck wild. I mean, less than Fresno. This is like Tulsa's going buck wild.
Okay, Madeline, like we live in a city of around 10 million people.
Yeah.
Right.
But Ukraine is the size of California, so a couple 100,000 people.
Yeah, I mean that's like a in their capital city.
It's like a Bakersfield. It's like a Bakersfield getting mad.
Yeah, but it's a Bakersfield getting mad in Sacramento.
It's like a Sacramento getting mad.
I'm just saying it's more than it's like trying to be like, nah, it's not that big of a deal.
Well, it's not a significant portion of the population. It's not that it's not a big deal.
Significant proportion, like granting how many people protested in a given moment, that's significant.
Yeah, but it's not, I don't know. It's not all of Ukraine. Again, all of Ukraine is not super into this, and that's important to note. So Yanukovych keeps having these conversations with these opposition leaders, which are mostly just right sector neo-Nazi guys. And Azarov ends up tendering his resignation as prime minister. Meanwhile, 15,000 Svoboda members hold a torchlight ceremony in the city of Lviv in honor of Stepan Bandera. Okay, so these are, when we say they're Nazis, they're fucking Nazis. Meanwhile, elected Svoboda officials start waging a campaign to rename its airport after Bandera as well, and successfully changing the name of Peace Street to the name of Nachial Battalion, which was an OUNB wing that participated directly in the Holocaust. And a Svoboda deputy says peace is a holdover from Soviet stereotypes. So they're like, fucking war's on? All right, bet. War's on. And we're coming out full Nazi. Now, February 2014. By this point, Right Sector is claiming, look, we've got 500 fighters on the Maidan Square as we speak. We could mobilize up to 5,000 nationwide. Other people are like, that's probably not true. The 5,000 would be a little bit of a stretch for Svoboda, or Right Sector, but it's significant. They have, again, a small but very militant and overarching and commanding presence over these riots. So as they stated, their goal in these protests was, quote, not for closer ties with Europe, but rather to build a nationalist Ukrainian state and stage a nationalist revolution. Now, the leader of Right Sector saying all of this at this time is a guy named Dmytro Yarosh, who calls himself a follower of Stepan Bandera. This is exactly what he's into. So these are the types of quote-unquote protesters which pop up around Maidan Square and in protest of the government. And the BBC states at this time that the Right Sector were, quote, the most radical wing of Ukraine's Maidan protests and played a leading role in the violence during the protests, engaging in things like throwing stones, which is pretty mild, all the way up to firecrackers being set off and throwing Molotov cocktails at the police. So, there's a range of different violence in there. It's not super bad yet, though. Hundreds of protesters get released from jail as part of this amnesty deal that leads to the evacuation of demonstrators from government buildings that they had kind of taken over around, Ukraine at this time. Maidan, however, remained like an encampment, basically, of these protesters. 25,000 people had ringed the square as an encampment with bonfires as a form of protection, like a barrier, like a moat, if you will, a fire moat.
They were occupying Wall Street.
They occupied Maidan. So Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, again, American, takes a meeting at this time with Svoboda leader Ole Tyahnybok, the same guy that, remember, McCain had stood on stage next to. She was also, remember, seen handing out cookies and sandwiches to protesters in the square, right? And we know that she had a leaked phone conversation with Jeffrey Pyatt, who is the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And she said Tyahnybok should remain on the outside. She's like, he's not really a leadership guy, if you know what I mean, right? But she's like, he should consult with the U.S.'s replacement for Yanukovych, somebody named Arseniev Yatsenyuk. She says he should be talking to this guy like 4 times a week. They should be in contact. Like, this guy, Tyahnybok, he's too much of a loose cannon. We can't just have a literal fucking Nazi in charge of Ukraine. But he should be heavily involved, and he should be talking to our pick, who's Yatsenyuk, 4 times a week. And I really want to take a second to emphasize this phone call. This basically communicates direct American involvement in what essentially amounts to a coup in Ukraine. And Nuland's pick, it's worth noting, Yatsenyuk, became prime minister less than 1 month later. So, Douglas Valentine writing about this says, the Obama regime and its privateering corporate partners overthrew the pro-Russian Ukraine government and installed a government packed with neo-Nazis and American elites. The average Ukrainian citizen does not benefit, just the American predator elite who organized the coup. It's amazing to behold. So the original Ukrainian government attempts to retake the Maidan from all of these 25,000 Western-backed protesters on February 18th. Meanwhile, pro-EU, anti-Yanukovych protesters in Western Ukrainian cities start taking over government buildings again. And EU officials threaten sanctions against Ukraine unless the Yanukovych administration is able to de-escalate the violence. So pro-EU opposition forces are occupying things like police stations and government offices, right? And on February 20th, the violence in Kiev escalates dramatically. Police and government security forces start firing on crowds of protesters because, they were basically trying to overthrow the government, and they weren't shy about it. And the EU was like, okay, that's enough. We have to sanction Ukraine. Like, you can't do that. So one article in Salon came out during this exact week, and it described the scene and said, as the Euromaidan protests in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev culminated this week, displays of open fascism and neo-Nazi extremism became too glaring to ignore. White supremacist banners and Confederate flags were draped inside Kiev's occupied city hall. And demonstrators...
Wait. Hold on. Back up, Madeline.
Yeah, Confederate flags. Yeah. If you're wondering about the American influence, yeah.
No. Okay. That, like, first of all, I love the idea of someone being like, hold on, I can't do accents, so this is me trying to do accent work.
Oh, okay. This is gonna be good.
You're like, fucking Andrei Belitsky or whatever the fuck that guy's name is, or whatever, and you're like, like,
that was French. That was a ho.
Yeah, he's Cajun.
Okay, all right. And what's he saying? Long live the Confederacy.
Long live the like. The Confederate.
Yeah, I know you're real bad.
Identified. I can't. No, like the idea that like some motherfucking Ukrainian is identifying himself with the antebellum motherfucking South is.
It's bonkers. This whole situation's bonkers. White supremacists, they're not very smart. So demonstrators also were hoisting Nazi SS and white power symbols over a toppled memorial to Vladimir Lenin. And Yanukovych, this article goes on and says, after Yanukovych fled his palatial estate by helicopter, Euromaidan protesters destroyed a memorial to Ukrainians who died battling German occupation during World War II. Sieg Heil salutes and the Nazi Wolf's Angel symbol have become increasingly common sights in Maidan Square, and neo-Nazi forces have established autonomous zones in and around Kiev. So, yeah, this is pretty wild.
Are you turning it over to me?
Not yet. We're not there yet.
Wait, this is literally the Azov Brigade. You were literally...
I know.
Okay, so I'm just going to say...
We're almost
through the section. I didn't write it in my notes, so this is just like my input. The first time the Azov Brigade made international news was they took over the trade union hall next to all the government buildings in Kiev during the Maidan protests.
Yes. So we're giving you like a little point in here, to kind of talk about all of this. And honestly, we're still in 2014. All of this is in 2014.
No, that's
the brigade doesn't get founded until a couple months after this.
First of all, debatable.
Okay. All right. We're going with the official start date. So we're going to get there. I got a whole system I'm taking us on. Okay.
Oh, boy.
So an anarchist group called Anti-Fascist Union Ukraine actually attempted to join the Euromaidan demonstrations, but said that they found it difficult to avoid threats of violence from basically these neo-Nazis roaming the squares. So one of them said they called the anarchists Jews, blacks, and communists. And the anarchist goes, there weren't even any communists. That was just an insult, which I think is really funny.
Honestly, I gotta say,
they're like, how did this anti-communist rally become neo-Nazi in nature? Like, babe, it's always Nazi. Anti-communism is always fascism. That's what it is. So the anarchists continued and said there are a lot of nationalists here, including Nazis. They came from all over Ukraine, and they make up around 30% of the protesters. One of the big three political parties behind the protests is, of course, Svoboda, who we've talked about, the one with the leader Ole Tyahnybok, who, again, McCain was standing next to, and Nuland was like, yeah, he's not good for a leadership role, but we should have him consulting with the leadership 4 times a week. And he called for the liberation of Ukraine from what he called the Muscovite Jewish mafia. After the 2010 conviction of the Nazi death camp guard John Demeniuk for supporting basically the murder of nearly 30,000 people at one specific camp during the Holocaust, Tyahnybok went to Germany to declare this man a national hero who was, quote, fighting for the truth. So this is the kind of level of Nazi we're talking about. We're talking about take a trip to Germany to defend another random Nazi level of Nazi, and defend him specifically for murdering a bunch of people. Now, in the Ukrainian parliament, Svoboda was holding 37 seats at this time.
Mm.
So
All
they
right.
were getting kind of popular. It was like out of, a couple hundred. So Tyahnybok's deputy, Yuri Mikolchashin, was, going around quoting Joseph Goebbels, meanwhile. And he actually founded
I'm sorry. Goebbels,
How do you say it?
like Germans say it.
How do they say it?
Goebbels.
Goebbels. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll call it Goebbels. I've heard that. So he even founds a think tank originally called the Joseph Goebbels Political Research Center. Now, according to Anders Rudling, who's a leading academic expert on European neo-fascism, the self-described, quote, socialist nationalist, National Socialist, Natzpol, Mikolchashin is the main link between Svoboda's official wing and neo-Nazi militias like Right Sector. So the bloodiest week in Ukraine's post-Soviet history concluded on February 21st of 2014. That's how far into 2014 we are, with an EU-brokered agreement between Yanukovych and opposition leaders that called for early elections and the formation of an interim unity government. And the parliament responded by doing the following. Number one, they approved the restoration of the 2004 constitution, which reduced the power of the presidency. Number two, they granted full amnesty to all of the protesters. Number three, they fired their internal affairs minister, Vitaly Zakharchenko, for his role in ordering the crackdown on the Maidan. Four, they decriminalized elements of the legal code under which Tymoshenko had been prosecuted. Number five, Yanukovych, is officially impeached. But it doesn't really matter because he'd already left Kiev by this point. He was like, bye. Remember, he took the helicopter out of town.
Yeah, okay. I just want to point out
on the wall,
Yanukovych was undoubtedly corrupt.
I mean, I'm sure he was. He was a guy who came after the last pro-Russian guy who got in trouble for assassinating that journalist.
No, I mean, I just this is a full disclosure thing, right? Whereas we just say, yes, Yanukovych did corruption, most political, Zelensky's done corruption, Yushchenko or whatever the fuck the guy did corruption,
Tymoshenko, everyone's corrupting.
Right, so right, if I understand correctly, Yanukovych's ousting had a lot to do with corruption as the thing.
I would say that what people were really mad at was the whole protest thing, because the EU was putting pressure on them, the failure to control the protests, and obviously the protests were being disproportionately led by neo-Nazis who were mad about the pro-Russia thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, okay, so you can say what is really at stake, but you can also say the pretext.
Oh, the pretext was corruption.
Right.
Okay, and I've seen the pretext has literally been the mishandling of the protests.
I mean, the mishandling of the protest was, let's say, the straw that broke the camel's back. But people were pretty pissed about the corruption.
Okay, I didn't ever see anything about that.
I mean, it's in the Sakwa book.
Oh, okay. What kind of corruption does he talk about?
It was essentially that he had centralized a lot of the steelworks stuff under his influence that had been sort of dispersed among a bunch of oligarchs' influence, including Kolomoisky and Firtash.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that doesn't sound that intense. So, all right. Reports start showing at this time that Right Sector was, quote, a catalyzing force that eventually helped to remove Yanukovych from power. So, meanwhile, Tymoshenko, our favorite girl with the Heidi braid, full
the gas princess, who also was hella fucking corrupt.
She was super corrupt. Definitely, she was super corrupt.
Right, she was the gas princess.
Yeah, she gets released from... I mean, she was literally in prison for corruption for a gas deal.
And, so, right, her release was one of the conditions of the EU associated agreements, right?
Yes. That is true. So she gets released from prison. She travels to Kiev and she gets involved in the protests. Because, of course, why doesn't she? She's going to get involved everywhere. She gives a little speech. It's not.
And everyone's like, oh my God, we're getting so much closer to Europe now.
Yeah, look at this Heidi braid going on. So, meanwhile, Alexander Turchinov, the leader of a different party called Fatherland, gets approved as acting president. And Tymoshenko is like, a coup has occurred here. This is a coup. I don't know if she meant by the United States or by Turchinov. I think anything in Timoshenko's mind that's not Timoshenko in power is a coup. But I think she's right.
I actually,
coup
I mean,
did occur.
she seemed like she is the Donald Trump of Ukraine.
She kind of is. That's the vibe I'm getting. She really is. She's an entertainer. I think she's actually right that a coup has occurred, just probably not in the way she's presenting it.
Yeah.
So, within days of this happening, the newly appointed Western government hatches a plan with the CIA in Ukraine. They've got this new Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, head named Valentin Nalyvaichenko, who reportedly proposes a three-way partnership between the CIA, MI6, and Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service. And the plan says Ukrainian security officials should prove our value to the United States by feeding CIA intelligence on Russia, basically, including secret documents about the Russian Navy, leading to the establishment of CIA bases in Ukraine to coordinate activities against Russia, and a bunch of training programs for Ukrainian commandos, right, and other elite units, right? So they're like, we'll give you info about Russia if you give us weapons and military training. And a graduate of one of these...
MI6 was just like happy to be included.
Probably. They're just like, oh my God, you want us? Cool.
Well, we haven't been relevant since Kim Philby.
Yeah. So a graduate of one of these CIA training programs, then Lieutenant Colonel Kirilo Budanov, actually went on to become the chief of Ukrainian military intelligence. So these training programs were a big deal. And these CIA operatives are confirmed to have been sent into the eastern region of Ukraine along the Russian border and engaged in active paramilitary operations there, which we'll talk about in a second. So this was the beginning of a beautiful bond that would extend well into the Trump presidency as well, between the CIA and Ukraine explicitly. And Ukraine, for its part, tested the waters of what it could really get away with now that it had the USA formally by its side. We know the USA had been up to stuff there before, but it was a little more under, the radar. Now they've got a government there in Ukraine that's really all in on the USA thing, and they're public partners. So they even went so far as to assassinate high-profile Russian fighters in Russian territory, because they're like, what are you going to do? We got the United States behind us. You're not going to do anything.
Do you remember, this was like the period of time where like CNN would report where it would be like, Obama and Putin met at like the Davos summit and they were like mean to each other?
Yeah, I think I do. And they were like, ooh.
Ooh, Obama didn't shake Putin's hand at Davos in 2015 or whatever the fuck, where it's just like, I hate both of these motherfuckers. Fuck these people.
I mean, yeah, it was just ridiculous reporting. So, according to Responsible Statecraft, the arrangement went far beyond helping Ukraine defend itself against Russia in a narrow technical sense. Rather, Ukraine was drawn into a Western coalition for the purpose of waging a broad-based shadow war against Russia. So on February 24th, because this is apparently the longest month ever, the interim government charged Yanukovych with mass murder in connection with the deaths of the Maidan protesters and issued a warrant for his arrest. So this is what I mean, where I'm like, everything I've seen, it's all, the pretext is all about the protests. Meanwhile, the economy in Ukraine, tanking. So Ukraine's post-uprising government embarked on what free market advocates would call economic shock therapy, right? State assets were rapidly sold off. Ukraine was transformed almost overnight into one of Europe's poorest nations, and a new class of billionaires kind of emerged from this to profit off of the whole ordeal. Washington was pushing for more privatization, basically taking on the same role that the United States had taken in post-Soviet Russia in the 1990s. So Ukraine's economy needed stability and needed it fast. Even like the IMF was like, hey, could you guys have a government, please? This is getting weird. So the interim Ukrainian government installed the fatherland leader, right, Yatsenyuk, as prime minister, and early presidential elections were scheduled for May 2014. And Yanukovych resurfaces on February 28th in Russia and delivers a defiant speech in Russian, which is a big deal. Because remember that this new government is made up of a lot of right sector guys who wanted to kill Russians. And he says in Russian, I am still the rightful president of Ukraine. And I'm inclined to agree with him. He's correct. So Putin actually has a funny quip about this whole thing, especially American involvement around the time. And he says, I have a feeling people in America sit in some lab doing experiments, like on rats, without knowing consequences. And I'm like, that's actually not too far from the truth, Putin. You kind of cooked with that one. So, this gets us to Crimea. So, we're going to do a little interlude with Joe Biden, our favorite guy.
Wait, okay, so Joe Biden, he's still conscious.
Yes, it's 2014. He's conscious.
He's hanging in there.
He's hanging in there. He's doing way better than last time we saw him, certainly. So Biden gets asked point blank one day about Russia's objections to NATO expansion in Ukraine. And he's president by 2014, right? And he says, I'm not recognizing anybody's red line. He's basically
Wait, you're not saying Biden is president in 2014.
Well, he's vice president. He's vice president. Sorry, I misspoke. So he says he's not recognizing anyone's red line. And a few weeks later, Putin orders what the West calls basically an invasion of Ukraine. But we see this issue is a little more complicated than the West is really making out to believe. So I've got another quote from Responsible Statecraft that says, the West foreign policy stalwarts have regarded Russia's military actions against Ukraine as something that President Putin views as an elective, an unprovoked ambition to acquire land and rebuild empire that is little more than a product of Russia's authoritarian impulses. And this is true. This is totally how the West is trying to paint Russia in this situation. But the situation of Crimea is very obviously anything but that. So, to know about Crimea, first you have to understand that it's a part of Ukraine that's not technically considered East or West, but its own kind of region in Crimea, which is a peninsula in the south of Ukraine that extends to nearly touch Russia. So it is closer to Russia. Now, Crimeans are overwhelmingly ethnically Russian, but most of them don't really identify as Ukrainian or Russian. They just kind of identify as Crimean. So you might imagine, though, that they just probably have a presence that's going to align more with the pro-Russian faction than the pro-European ones because they're just really close to Russia.
I mean, I'm going to say, if you're doing like Wilsonian style nationalism, we just call it Ukraine, or we call it Crimea.
Crimea, yeah.
Its own little tiny nation.
But it's important because of what happens next. So they do, though, because they are ethnically Russian and they're very close to Russian, if Ukraine, for example, was in a position to be like, choose a side, which Ukraine is at this time, Crimea is going to be like, bet, we choose Russia. And that is exactly what Crimea ends up doing. So prior to 2013 and 2014, Crimeans were not too concerned about whether or not they were Ukrainian or Russian. Like you said, David, they're just kind of like, we're Crimean. It doesn't super matter. But by 2014, this had definitely changed. As early as 2013, in fact, nearly a quarter of Crimeans actively wanted to secede from Ukraine and formally join Russia due to the changing political climate in Ukraine. Now, for a separatist movement, this is a huge number. Like, do you know the number of people in Taiwan who want to immediately separate from China? It's like 4.3%. All right. It's very, very low. Yeah, it's extremely low.
Granting how Taiwan was founded, I would assume higher.
Really? I would not assume higher because of how it was founded.
Taiwan, the state founded by like Chiang Kai-shek.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because of that, I'm like, oh, everyone there is like, this is goofy. We're just China. So 25% is pretty massive. All right. And that's not the end of the numbers by the time we're done with them. So, imagine a quarter of the people, for example, that thinking your state should just become part of Mexico or part of Canada. That's pretty significant.
I love that you keep doing Mexico as a thing where I'm like...
Because we're closest to Mexico. That's our immediate neighbor.
Like, Claudia Sheinbaum seems kind of chill.
Right, but what I'm saying is it doesn't matter. What matters is that's a significant change. So if 25% of the people you knew, if 1 in 4 people you knew wanted to secede from the United States and join Mexico, seriously, that would be such a massive change that along with it could come political instability, that the only reason that would seem worthwhile is if you were experiencing so much political instability at home that nearby country looked real good by comparison. This is an extreme position to take. So 25% is a huge number for a separatist movement is what we're talking about here. So this is pretty massive. And when people spoke to these Crimeans, we kind of can read the interviews with them and get a sense of where their head's at. Like NewsHour's senior foreign affairs correspondent, Margaret Warner, interviewed people in Crimea and said they talked about having more jobs and investment if they joined Russia. And they also talked about feeling much more at home with Russia. This is an area that for 300 years was part of Russia and then the Soviet Union. And they almost all, complained about being forced to fill out forms in Ukrainian because the Ukrainian government had started requiring everybody to use Ukrainian instead of Russian in a
And this
manner.
was something, by the way, Yanukovych, like to his credit, tried to fight against like the Ukrainian only laws
Right,
and government
exactly. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Like,
Because he was not the pro-Western guy. He was more of a we should be friends with our neighbor Russia guy. He was more old school. So of course he fought back against that. But this is something the Yushchenko types were super into. And, you know, even human rights groups around the world were like, hey, this is actually pretty messed up. You can't like strip people of their native languages like this.
mhm.
So pro-Russian protests in Crimea break out in defense of Yanukovych and the prior government, basically asserting, hey, a coup has occurred here in our country and it has been stolen by pro-Western forces. Masked gunmen occupied the Crimean parliament building and raised a Russian flag, and lawmakers there officially dismissed the sitting government and installed Sergei Aksyonov, the leader of the Russian Unity Party, as Crimea's prime minister. Voice and data links between Crimea and Ukraine were severed, and Russian authorities acknowledged that they had actually moved troops into the region in order to back this secession movement and help annex Crimea per their wishes. The Ukrainian president this time, Turchinov, is like, hey, you can't just take Crimea. That is part of Ukraine. And Putin is like, I don't know, man. It kind of seems like they really want to be a part of Russia. And they're Russian citizens. And it also protects Russian citizens or they're not Russian citizens. They're Russian ethnically. But this also protects Russian citizens within our borders nearby. You can't just have like weird fights breaking out on our border. And
So, I mean,
cool
like to
about
be
that.
clear, a quarter of the population
Well,
is
that's just the preliminary. Wait until we get to the official count. Remember,
okay.
a quarter of the population was in 2013. Now we're in 2014 and shit's really hit the fan. We haven't got to the official 2014 number yet. And it's going to shock you. So
Mhm.
Putin's like, we've got military assets in Crimea because we had this deal with you where we were renting a port, you know, back in the day. We're not going to let you just have them in the middle of the skirmish. And the newly appointed leader of Crimea, Aksyonov, is like, basically like, look at me, to Kiev, look at me, I'm in charge now, fuck you. He's just like, I'm not listening to Ukraine, we're not Ukrainian, and he is like, look, all of the former Ukrainian military and citizens in Crimea, they're not yours anymore, they're ours. That's our military now, those are our citizens, that's Crimea. And they declare the new capital of Crimea to be Simferopol. Now, Crimea then engages in an electoral process to formalize their vote to secede from Ukraine. So on March 6th, the Crimean parliament voted officially to go through with this secession from Ukraine and join the Russian Federation. And they, alongside this, had a public referendum on the matter scheduled for March 16th, 2014. And at this point, popular support in Crimea for joining Russia gets way, way higher. People are like, we're cooking. It's happening. This is good. We're going to be with the more stable guys. This is going to be awesome. And the west part of Ukraine gets so mad about this. They're like, you can't leave us. You can't leave us. They claim that, you know, the referendum, the votes are going to be fake because, like, there's armed guards there at the polling station. So what if people were intimidated and felt like they had to vote a certain way? There's absolutely no real evidence that these votes in any way were not legitimate. Residents of Crimea in these elections vote 97% in favor of joining Russia. Almost every single person in Crimea is like, fuck you, we're out. Just because, again, people in Crimea had no interest in joining Russia before all of this happened. But they were like, the coup, this shit's crazy. You've got fucking neo-Nazis running through the streets. They're yelling that they want to kill Russians. We're ethnically Russian. Like, you're a whole mess. And we're not sticking around for it. So this is like a pretty wild number. You know, later some reports are like, well, voter turnout was only, you know, like 50% or so. Like, what if the other 50% of people who didn't vote just actually really wanted to stay a part of Ukraine? And you're like, okay, this is like a massive cope, you know? This is just the West trying to invent ways that these numbers weren't legitimate because all sources are like, no, these are real legitimate numbers, right? How many people turn out to American elections, for example? So this actually, you know, even by their own definitions, they're like, maybe it's still more like a quarter or a half of Crimea that wants to join Russia. even if that were true, I still think that is a massive number for a separatist movement. But it looks like with Crimea, the figures were actually, just 97%, and the West was desperately trying to justify this. Pretty interesting. And so Kiev won't let it go, though. They're like, we don't care if 97% of you don't want to be Ukrainian anymore. You're Ukrainian. But ultimately, on March 18th, Putin meets with Askanov and other regional representatives and officially signs this treaty, incorporating Crimea into the Russian Federation. And within hours of the treaty signing, a Ukrainian soldier is killed because masked gunmen storm a Ukrainian military base outside of Simferopol, right? Just like, okay, well, now guess what? Your military base is a foreign invasion kind of military base on our land that we didn't consent for, and armed conflict starts. So Russian troops move in and they occupy a bunch of bases throughout the peninsula to defend their new territory acquisition of Crimea, including Sevastopol, which was actually a port that Ukraine had previously leased to them. The irony. And the pro-Western factions remaining in Crimea are like, fuck this, not worth it, we're out, and they evacuate. Now, on March 21st, after the ratification of the annexation treaty by the Russian parliament, Putin signs a law formally integrating Crimea into Russia, right? So I think if you're in the West, this is not how you hear about the Crimean annexation going. We make it sound like it was forceful, like Putin did it with military force. You don't really hear in the U.S. that, pretty much all of Crimea wanted to join Russia because Ukraine was so fucked. I don't hear people talk about that very much, but that is a very real thing. Now,
my understanding, as just a dumb guy who doesn't pay attention to the news and has never heard a fact in his life, was always like, oh yeah, it seems like there were a bunch of Russian separatists. It also seems like this came at a period of extreme Ukrainian instability.
That's what it was. There weren't a lot of Russian separatists in Crimea before this. This wasn't a thing. So another area to talk about in addition to Crimea is Odessa. Now, Odessa isn't in Crimea. It's not also even really in the eastern part of Ukraine. But a lot of people there are, again, more sympathetic to the Russian government as well. And lots of people from Odessa, we will see, actually go travel into the eastern part of Ukraine later to fight off the far-right kind of EU alliance, new government of Ukraine, the neo-Nazis basically, right, who are they're provoking the citizens. So on May 2nd of 2014, dozens of communists and leftists in Odessa who aligned more with Russia actually got murdered in a structure fire by some of these far-right neo-Nazi battalions. Some members of the right sector took part in that rally in Odessa that led up to the event, and they were armed with bats and metal sticks. And there was a confrontation between what they called radical members of the right sector and reporting and Maidan self-defense units, right? And armed pro-federalism activists, right? People who were in favor of the status quo existing kind of Ukrainian government that turned violent and disorderly. And this all culminated, I think you mentioned this actually, in the trade union building fire. You talked about that earlier, right?
Well, no. So, and this is a different thing.
I thought it was
Maidan.
the same thing. Okay.
So right, you're gonna place. I think next week, I guess, will be the Azov battalion shit.
Yeah, we'll see how much we get through. I mean, it depends on the length of the episode, really. But I think so. We're at around an hour and 20 minutes right now.
Okay, and I mean, you've presumably got many more notes because I know you.
Yeah, we're gonna get through the Donbass region, and I think that'll be the rest of the episode.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Azov shit comes out of weird soccer. Okay, call this a predictor because you asked about it.
Yes.
So the Azov battalion comes out of the Donbass stuff, but they have their origins way back in the I can't remember, the Svoboda fucking party.
Yeah.
And they step onto the international stage, so to speak, during Euromaidan as people who occupied a trade union building in Kiev next to the legislature.
Oh, okay. They were just occupying it. They weren't. Yeah. Okay. This is different. Yeah. So, yeah, this incident, ended in a fire set at the trade union building where the left wing protesters fighting back against the Western Ukrainian neo Nazi far right fascist extremists had taken refuge. The right wing fascist element lit the building on fire. And in total, 46 people were killed and at least 230 people were injured in this fire. So this is the element that's now in the government in Ukraine, running the government of Ukraine. Because these kind of, we'll see these neo-Nazi far-right groups. We heard about the one guy, obviously, who's absorbed kind of into this consolation role per Victoria Nuland, right, in the region. But we'll see that these paramilitary groups, these neo-Nazi paramilitary groups, end up actually getting fully absorbed into the Ukrainian military. So on May 9th, Putin celebrated Victory Day, a holiday that commemorates the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II with a trip to Crimea. And this is really symbolic because we see a bunch of separatists in eastern Ukraine began aggressively trying to fight off neo-Nazi elements, right, of the Ukrainian anti-Russian pro-EU right wing. So this is kind of like the symbolic thing. Putin's like, I'm going to Crimea for a reason. Like, I'm doing this. So, of course, the United States gets involved, right, in this whole ordeal. And the United States around this time and the EU start imposing asset freezes and travel bans on numerous Russian officials and members of the Crimean parliament, specifically for Crimea choosing to leave Ukraine and join Russia, which is wild to me. And eventually we'll see that the US and EU issue sanctions on Russia that messes with their economy pretty bad. Like, this is what I was talking about. The guy who repaired my washing machine, who was Ukrainian, and then he fled Ukraine during this era.
Yeah, I think you cut literally this section out.
Yeah, no, I'm telling it now. You don't have to show them how the sausage is made, David.
I always want to.
It makes it hard for people to follow if they're not in on the story. You have to present all the info in a way where people can follow it, right? So if you're referencing things that just you and I know about that they don't know about.
Okay, but you're a vegan. You want people to know how the sausage is made.
Well, okay. We did cut this out earlier. But I think it's a good anecdote to go here, basically. So, yeah, this is kind of the area where this guy I met, who's a washing machine repairman, who came to my house. He had been living in Ukraine. He was Ukrainian. He was born in Ukraine during the USSR. This situation got so bad that he left Ukraine during this, and he went to go live in Moscow. And, then the EU and the United States eventually put a bunch of sanctions against Russia, and he was like, okay, this is bad, but I can handle it. But then eventually Putin started sanctioning the EU and the United States back, and he was like, well, my business deals with a lot of imports, so I'm officially out of luck now. And then he moved to the United States. And I just thought that was an interesting story about kind of his journey and how his personal life was impacted by all this. So meanwhile, let's go back to the Ukrainian economy. Yatsenyuk, over in the remaining Ukraine, negotiates a deal with the IMF to craft a bailout package that's going to address their $35 billion in unmet financial obligations. Yatsenyuk's also meeting with EU officials in Brussels, and on March 21st, he signs a portion of the association pact that had been actually rejected by Yanukovych in November 2013. And the IMF ultimately proposes an $18 billion loan package that's contingent on Ukraine's adoption of course, austerity measures, which is what the IMF loves to do most, which is basically just like cut social spending, do not provide literally a single thing to your people. All money go to debt repayment now. And, the IMF does basically these bad debt trap kind of loans like that ruin countries. So these austerity measures also include the devaluation of the local currency, as well as curbs on state subsidies that reduce the price of natural gas to consumers. So meanwhile, Russia is like, hey, do you remember how we annexed Crimea? Sevastopol, that port we were leasing from you, well, that's in Crimea, so that's just ours now. So we don't really have to lease it anymore, so we're not paying for that. So also the deal was, in exchange for that, we were going to give you below market rates on Russian gas. We're not doing that anymore. Now you have to pay Russian market gas rates. Sorry. So things are not looking great for the Ukrainian economy. And the price of gas in Ukraine goes up 80% in just a couple of weeks as a result of this. So this kind of leads us to the question. Everybody's like, what does Russia want in all of this? Why is Russia getting involved? Ukraine this whole time is like, fuck, Russia's going to try to take more of us. And Putin is like, we actually don't want to annex more of you. We annexed Crimea because they asked, but, we know politically it doesn't make sense for us to go annexing more of your territory, right? It's a bad look. It's going to piss off the Europeans and the Americans. So they're like, look, we have 40,000 troops on the border just in case you start some shit with NATO and your new Western friends, but we're not actually going to come take any more of your land. And two other major things are happening. Number one, a separatist movement is growing in a different region of Ukraine, the eastern region called the Donbass. And there's a whole thing going on with NATO still that we'll talk about in a bit.
Is this the Donbass is a part of the Dnipro? I don't know how to say this properly. Dnipro Basin. I think, in fact, Donbass is in fact a portmanteau of the Dnipro Basin.
Possibly, yeah, that could be. Yeah,
this is what I understand to be the case.
Yeah, this
right?
is because there
are like two separate regions that
there are two exactly. There are two separate smaller regions that make up the Donbass, and those regions.
One is like the Dnipro, and the other is like the Dnipro, and then like some letters.
Oh, that's what you're saying. The names of those two
Yes, I am trying to explain. Like, right, like I'm just gonna say, right, like I keep being such a little shit about this, but those regions make up. So there's like all of these like fucking business deals between like Georgia and Ukraine or whatever, and like I don't mean to be a shit about this. I'm not trying to be an asshole. I promise I'm not trying to be an asshole. Right. There is like coke processing and all of these like rare earth minerals that go into steel processing that happen between those two separate regions and Georgia, which famously Russia kind of fucking invaded in 2008. Right. That like are like, right. This is like a large part of like Ukraine's industrial economic base.
Yeah, I mean, they actually have a pretty cooking economy in normal times, I will say. They have a lot of things that various different authors have said. This is the pivotal part of their economy. It's the agriculture sector. It's the mining sector. It's the...
Yeah, it's like magnesium. I can't remember the fucking...
Yeah, it's something like magnesium. Yeah, totally.
Magnesium, but or whatever. But like one report that was like sort of like a prediction of like there was like a 2025 fucking report of like what the likely outcome of the Ukraine-Russia conflict was. Like, it looks like Russia is about to adopt about like $4 trillion in natural resources.
Well, we'll see what happens. I have some thoughts about this and we'll see how it goes. So the regions you're talking about, by the way, are Donetsk and Luhansk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a portmanteau, I don't believe, unless you're talking about something else.
There's the Donbass is literally the Dnipro Basin or something.
Okay, yeah. Like that makes sense. Yeah, it's just called the Donbass. Yeah. Okay. So it's not the two regions you're mentioning. So remember how Eastern Ukraine had always culturally aligned more with Russia? And they always backed the Ukrainian politicians, for example, who also wanted to distance themselves from the EU and do more advantageous deals with Russia as well. So how do you think this whole region of people who are ethnically Russian, who back the more pro-Russian political candidates, suddenly feel about a bunch of neo-Nazis telling them they can't speak their native language anymore, running through their streets, lighting buildings on fire?
No, I mean, okay, first of all, you gave me the Azov battalion, whatever the fuck, battalion. So I know, because I read about this extensively. Not great, motherfucker.
Yeah, they did not feel great about it. The people in the Donbass region, which is a large section of eastern Ukraine, are not very happy with what is going on. And they see Crimea is trying to leave. They left. They're like, okay, maybe we have some wiggle room. So Truth Out actually did a report on this, right? And they said what the coup also did was revive long pent-up antagonisms between the ethnic Ukrainians in the West, including elements that had supported Adolf Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union during World War II, and ethnic Russians in the South and East who feared the anti-Russian sentiments emanating from Kiev. So the main area we talk about when we discuss this region in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine is the two smaller provinces broken up between it, right, that we call Donetsk and Luhansk. So, as the BBC reported at this time, Russia has accused Right Sector of involvement in violence against pro-Moscow separatists in eastern Ukraine, i.e. the Donbas region. The Right Sector denies this, but maintains a barrage of anti-Russian rhetoric. And the separatists movement in the Donbas region is kind of growing. They're like, we want to leave the way Crimea did. And they start doing kind of the same thing. They start seizing public buildings in early April. Dmitry Yarosh, meanwhile, urges his followers to mobilize in defense of Ukraine's national integrity against these protesters in the Donbas region who want to secede. According to National Interest, the Right Sector, meanwhile, was playing a significant role in providing paramilitary support for Ukrainian troops in the Donbas to fight back against these protesters, and was, quote, the last militia force to operate in the East independent of the government-controlled army. A report by the UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Summary or Arbitrary Executions, who visited Ukraine later on after this in the summer of September 2015, who kind of reported on what was going on there, though, around this time, indicated that Right Sector remained an active and independent militia both in the Donbas region and in wider Ukraine. The same source expressed concerns that there were physical attacks on journalists, writers, defense lawyers, judges perpetrated by militant groups, including the Right Sector in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Former people who were taken prisoner by Right Sector from the Donbas region said they experienced all sorts of abuses, mock executions, extortion, violent beatings, death threats, the denial of medical care, just like, it's absolutely wild. And Right Sector was reportedly holding dozens of civilian prisoners as hostages, extorting large amounts of money from their families in order to return them in basically East Ukraine. So Donbas region is like, hey, we're also into this either, we want to leave. And Ukraine responds by basically sending a bunch of armed fucking psychopaths to them to terrorize them and hold them hostage and extort their family members and beat the shit out of them.
Wait, okay, so we're fully into the Donbas siege.
Well, we're kind of getting there, yeah.
Okay.
So pro-Russian separatists, right, start accusing the Right Sector of attacking a checkpoint in the region on April 20th, where 2 people died. And they said that Yarosh's business card was actually found in a burnt-out car used in the attack. Right Sector was like, we didn't do it. Russia staged the event as a false flag. But we know that even if they didn't do that one specific thing, Right Sector was involved in similar activities in the Donbas region and throughout Ukraine, trying to squash any growing separatist movement. So in April 2014, Right Sector activists picketed, burned documents, and sealed off the office of the Communist Party in Rivne due to their support, again, of these separatist activities in southeast Ukraine. In May 2014, the Right Sector was banned in Luhansk by the People's Council there. By July 2014, an article in Jane's Intelligence Review indicated the Right Sector had an estimated strength of 10,000 heavily armed militia members, and they had amassed 450,000 followers on Facebook, which is just the most dystopian statement to have to add in this whole thing. They were found by this point, remember, this is like an independent kind of group with government ties, but not officially quite yet part of the Ukrainian military, although they had been sent there by the Ukrainian president. They were in possession of AK-47s, handguns, machine guns, rocket launchers, which were seized from a military arsenal in western Ukraine back in February 2014. Following the Maidan protests, the Right Sector basically refused to surrender all of their unregistered weapons to the Ukraine military that they got during the uprising, and they were just like, no, these are ours now. By May of 2014, also, Right Sector was found to be affiliated with other ultra-right-wing neo-Nazi groups like Trident, the Ukrainian National Assembly, Ukrainian National Self-Defense, sometimes abbreviated to UNA, UNSO. The Patriots.
Wait, I had a question about. I'm not like a weapon guy. I'm not that kind of dude.
Yeah.
You said the right-wing people had AK-47s.
Yeah.
Interesting. They did not have Tavor rifles.
What's a Tavor rifle?
It's the rifle of the IDF.
Oh, well, isn't
they will eventually have Tavor rifles. I'm just gonna.
Okay.
Spoiler alert.
I feel like is an AK-47 a brand name or a type of gun? I've never fired like a rifle. I've only fired handguns.
I'm sorry. Okay, so again, I'm not a gun guy. My best friend is a gun guy. The AK-47 is a Soviet-produced rifle.
Right. I can picture it in my head. I know what an AK-47 looks like.
Right. So you actually probably know what an AK-74 looks like.
Okay.
Again, not a gun guy. Am good friends with a gun guy.
Uh-huh.
No, but this is just interesting. Okay, so all of the right, eventually Israel's going to get involved.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Of course. Yeah, they're going to get involved anywhere where shit goes bad.
But it's so the AK-47 or the AK-74, which was just like the replacement for the AK-47 that looked basically the same but was like slightly more reliable. Which, you know, is whatever. But it was like, if you think of like the Viet Cong or whatever, and like the rifles they carry, they are AK-47s. If you think of any like third world liberation type motherfuckers, they're carrying AK-47s, which is just funny to me that anti-Russian motherfuckers, not to be a bitch about this,
are carrying Russian guns.
Yeah, you understand what I'm saying.
I understand the irony. Yes. Is AK-47 though like a brand name or just like a type of gun?
No, it's a brand gun. It's like the Kalashnikov.
The Kalashnikov. Okay, I know what a Kalashnikov is. Yeah.
Right, like it was like designed by a guy, I think, in like the like immediate post-war. So during World War II, what's the fucking Woody Guthrie song? Miss Pavlichenko.
Mm-hmm.
Killed by your gun, 300 Nazis killed by your gun.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, I remember this. Yeah. About the snipers?
You know the song. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about the most famous sniper, but that was a Mosin Nagant. But after World War II, the Soviet Union designed a rifle, the AK-47, designed by a guy named Kalashnikov.
Yeah.
That was essentially the like standard issue rifle for the Soviet military.
I knew that. I just didn't know. I just didn't know if AK-47 was like a model number or like a brand name. I just never knew, you know?
Yeah, and then like right, it was redesigned. Is like
Glock a type of handgun, or is that the name of a brand of gun maker?
Yes,
it'd be like
Glock
a question like that.
A brand.
But I know that because I know handguns. I'm just giving you like you know.
Glock, I think it's Austrian or some shit.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is that's the question I had about the AK-47 because Glock's a handgun.
No. Right, like it is like literally like the only reason I find this funny, and this is like the dumbest fucking thing for a person who's not into guns. Actually, I'm pretty into guns. Is that like it's funny that like anti-Russian people are walking around with AK-47s.
Yeah, for sure. It is funny. Okay. So
go on with your story.
All right. So the right sector, this is really where like the siege of the Donbass kind of begins as we think about it. The right sector basically begins just systematically terrorizing people in the Donbass region at this point. Video footage just recorded by average everyday people in the Donbass regions who were frightened for their lives show them barricading their streets, their towns, blocking their doors, blocking their roadways with debris and trash, trying to create barriers to keep off basically these mad right-wing hooligans running through the streets trying to harm them. They know in these videos, they're like neo-Nazi far-right fascist extremists are on their way to our front doors. And you can see like women crying in the videos. This one woman in one video is like, I didn't think they would attack us. We're just grandmothers. And they're really, these guys in right sector are carrying out their OUN forefathers' actions during World War II in many ways, just terrorizing their neighbors with violence. And the video footage is actually really difficult to watch, but, you know, it's included in our source links as always, but just fair warning, I had it on one day while I was doing my research and my partner had to turn it off because it was like too hard to watch. And this is all just like found kind of footage compiled from different people's personal experiences filming what was going on in the Donbass when they were there. Meanwhile, pro-Russia counter-protesters who were like defending basically the Donbass, they started popping up all over eastern Ukraine. still working to seize government buildings, and they were kind of starting to get armed with Russian weapons, like not just like an AK-47, but like weapons from Russia. So
AK-74, perhaps.
perhaps, yeah. So they're armed with these Russian weapons, and this is not lost on Western Ukraine. They're like, okay, so Russia's arming you at the very least. In one case, confusion actually broke out because the counter-protesters seized an opera house, and people in the West were like, well, if you really lived in Donbass, you would know that that was an opera house, and you probably were trying to go for City Hall. That's speculation as well, but basically people in Western Ukraine were like, maybe it's just Russians doing this and not Ukrainians at all. And you can't tell because the Ukrainians in this region all are ethnically Russian and speak Russian, right? Which is kind of part of the whole
again,
thing.
I want to point this out, right? Like 80% of Ukrainians, regardless of region, speak Russian.
Yeah, these are people who spoke Russian as their primary language.
No,
like
yeah, right. Like either first or
Russian.
second, which was why, and like I have my feelings about fucking Yanukovych, but like why like the anti-Russian laws were so fucking punitive because so many people in Ukraine fucking speak Russian.
Yeah, it's really wild. So, I don't personally think it's super important who doing this was Ukrainian versus Russian, because what we know is that a not insignificant number of people in the Donbass region, just like in Crimea, were overwhelmingly in support of getting the hell out of Ukraine at this point. Now, like we talked about, Donbass region is broken up into two smaller regions, Luhansk and Donetsk. And both are like, we're going to have our own referendum on independence and getting out of Dodge. Like, leaving Ukraine, it's falling apart fast. It's overrun with Nazis who are terrorizing us. And being a part of Russia will protect us. So the results of these votes, though, they overwhelmingly vary, right? But they support independence. It's not as clear cut, though, as it was basically in Crimea. So there's some range here, right, for how much people were really into this. People aren't sure how reliable they are. The Donbass region is, we know, though, has a large, significant number of people who are actively being harmed and terrorized and would be safer with Russia. So Putin is like, okay, look, first of all, I don't know if these elections, how valid they are. I don't know. It's not, Crimea was a clear-cut case. That was easy. Okay, this is not as clear-cut. There's wiggle room for people to fight with it. There's wiggle room for people to say these elections were fraudulent, that there is not actually this huge, overwhelming support for this. And he's like, I'm not stupid. I just took Crimea. If I take you too, it's going to be the EU and the USA on my ass. It's going to be World War III. It's not worth it. So this is the part where he says, okay, I'm not going to annex you. You can't become part of Russia, but I will officially back your independence movement if you want to become an independent new country free of Ukraine. And this is kind of what his take on this all is, right? He can't do another Crimea. It's too soon. It's too much. But he can back their independence movement. Still, the EU expanded its sanctions against Russian individuals and companies just basically for Donbass even wanting to do this and holding this referendum. So this kind of gets us up to Azov, which I do feel like, I know it's a shorter episode right now, but I just feel like you have so much stuff about Azov, and it's going to be really good to like start the episode fresh with it.
Wait, can we do, let's do this as like, next week.
Okay, yeah.
And then we can do a chit chat,
okay.
Right? Because I've been like, right, I think one of the tensions that's been really fun, probably not fun for you, but is that I have been like really interested in the sort of like post-Soviet Union Ukrainian economy and the ways in which the shifting alliances of a bunch of like weirdo freaks who managed to make out good from like the dismantling of like the Soviet economy in Ukraine have affected Ukrainian people. Like, so that's my like pitch for next week.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that make sense?
I mean, yeah, I think it does. I think it goes without saying, obviously, the destruction of the USSR was catastrophic, and Ukrainians will tell you that, right? Only 20% of Ukrainians over the age of 65 who were old enough in 2009 to have experienced, right, capitalism and communism, like we said in the first episode, only 20% of them approved of the switch to this system. They were not a system.
No, and so like you talked, and we'll talk a lot next week about the Kuchma government, the 90s government, because I think I told you when we were like planning this episode, I was like, I don't know, man, this is gonna be real non-linear. Do you remember me texting you?
Yeah, I do. And I was like, I don't know, my shit's pretty linear.
And I was like, yeah, but like if you want, okay, so I'm gonna give like a preview of a guy named, I don't know how to say fucking Ukrainian names because they look like Russian, but they have like a weird letter missing.
Okay.
But it's like either Igor or Ihor
Okay.
Kolomoisky. Who funded the Azov Brigade in their early days, which is real fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, Madeline, can you tell me what do the Azov Brigade love Jews?
No, they are Nazis. They are literal fucking Nazis.
One of the fun things about Kolomoisky is that
oh, my lights went out. Keep going. I'm just gonna put my light switch on.
Okay. So one of the fun things, and Madeline hollers so that I don't sound like a fucking crazy anti-Semite.
Know how far you think the light switch is, but that only took like 5 seconds.
Okay, so the funny thing about one of the early funders, so the Azov Brigade battalion, whatever the fuck they are, has now been incorporated within like the Ukrainian military.
Yes, they have.
But in their early days, they were funded as a private militia during the Donbass siege or whatever by a guy who is a joint. Well, he's actually lost his Ukrainian citizenship.
He's the worst of both worlds, this guy. He's really everything you hate in the whole world, this man.
But he was at the time a joint Ukrainian Israeli citizen.
Billionaire.
Everything
about him bad.
But right, like you just like, I feel like I want to, like, I read so many interviews with like Azov battalion guys who were like, no, we don't actually hate Russians, but we think Putin's a Jew.
So wild.
Which was fucking sick as hell. Like I was like, like if you told that like small billionaire man, like sitting at his like summer estate on the Black Sea or whatever, hey man, and there are a bunch of neo-Nazis in Ukraine who think you're a Jew.
It's absolutely wild. I think like there's so much stuff about this that's so fascinating because we'll see that same guy later funded Zelensky's presidential run as well.
Oh yeah,
it's Jewish.
No, and like the funny thing, like right, like again, this is like previewing next week, but like there were like Azov was kind of the tip of the iceberg of like the private militias that were going on.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff that we hear happening with Donbass, it is important to note, it's not even officially the Ukrainian military doing this. It is private, basically contracted out volunteer militia.
And like Kolomoisky at one point paid another militia, which I believe was called the Dnipro battalion, to take over a private bank because it seemed like that bank might be nationalized.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what when we say like contemporary history is the battle between fascists and communists, or people the fascists have decided are communists, even if they're not. Well, capitalists go, oh no, how do I profit off of this? That's like literally what this dynamic is. The capitalist billionaire guy is like, I will hire the Nazis. I will hire the Jews. The Nazis will kill the communists and defeat the nationalization of industries, and I will profit off of the whole thing. You're like, this is the most clear-cut example.
What was happening was Yanukovych seemed like he might be electing like a person who was like maybe hostile to Kolomoisky's interests to the head of the national bank, or like it was like the bank that was somehow connected to private bank or privat bank or whatever the fuck the bank was, right? It was like private without an E. Bank. And Kolomoisky was like, no, I'm just going to send my literal private militia in and be like, this is like anti-Russian. Just like the whole thing is like, it's hella.
It's wild.
Forgive me, it's hella fucking fakakta.
Yeah, it is. I actually have a quote I think it would be good to end the episode on. If you'll indulge me.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Just as a little treat for next time, a little foreshadowing. No, a little teaser. That's the one. The leader of Azov Brigade, Andrew Belitsky, who David did mention earlier, if anybody caught it, he once said in 2010, just so you know, the type of Nazi.
Oh wait, this is the one that's in like every fucking article about Belinsky, where it's like to suppress the go on.
The historic mission of our nation in this critical moment is to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade for their survival. A crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen.
Okay, so first of all, that's annoying because that was like the quote that I let off my fucking notes with for next week. So
well, that's perfect. Yeah. It'll be bookended. We bookended. Yeah. It's perfect. Perfect.
No, the funny thing, there's a really good story about Belitsky's early days where he was given like a Bandera book when he was a child by his father. And he was like, I've understood since, because he grew up in the Soviet era. I think he was born in like the 70s. I don't have my notes in front of me. Are you looking up when Belitsky was?
No, I think you should save it for the next episode, though.
Okay, well, motherfucker,
save it. It's good. We're already at like 2 hours on this.
Okay, so can I just say, the billionaires in fucking Ukraine, like the billionaires in Russia are fucking crazy. Right, we all live in oligarchies, right? It's just like we are all familiar with the Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg oligarchy of our country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's always nice to learn about the oligarchs of other countries.
I mean, it is. It's interesting. They're just as wacky. And I think next week's episode will be some really good examples of that. But, you know, it's horrifying because there's Nazis involved and they want to kill people.
And so some of the Nazis are being funded by, like, I just got to say,
Jewish billionaires.
This is the thing that, like, if you told the guy who was like, or if you told Belitsky, right, the, Semite-led Untermensch guy, that guy, hey man, did you know that like all your money is coming from a Semite?
He'd be like, that's fine. I think he'd be like, yeah, we need that though. That's good. They should. You know, I don't know. It's wild. But I think the next week's going to be a really good episode. So with that, that's the end of the episode. Thanks everybody for sticking around. You can join us over on Patreon, patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. For $3 a month, you can get access to bonus information, bonus episodes, and video episodes. So this episode, for example, will be available as a video episode up there over on the Patreon. If you're not into that, we are just happy that you are here.